For 11 years, that manila folder kept a multi-million-dollar company afloat. Then, one slick new hire saw it, scoffed, and tossed it in the trash. I knew something was wrong the second I saw Damien wrinkle his nose at the simple, beige folder sitting on the conference room table, acting like it smelled bad. That folder had been there every single Tuesday for over a decade. It was always closed, always neatly labeled, and always in the exact same spot. Checklist review, vendor ops. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't a digital dashboard. It was just Eli's way of working, and until that day, no one had ever dared to question it. We all respected the ritual, even if we never said it out loud. Eli was the foundation, the silent promise that everything was taken care of, but Damien didn't respect silence or tradition. He burst into our finance operations meeting like he was coming straight from a TED Talk stage. He was private equity slick, fresh off a multi-year gig at some trendy consultancy firm where they wear designer sneakers with tailored suits and talk about disruption like it's the greatest virtue in the world. He walked into our quiet, numbers-focused room expecting a visionary presentation, but instead, he got Eli's manila folder, which probably looked to him like a crossword puzzle from 1987. He picked up Eli's famous checklist, flipping through the pages with just 2 fingers, as if the paper itself might contaminate him. "This," he announced, his voice dripping with condescension, "this is your system." Eli didn't even flinch. He never did. He leaned back in his chair, slow as thick honey, took a sip of his room-temperature coffee, and replied, "It's what keeps payments compliant." No excuses, no apologies, just a plain, cold fact. That was the essence of Eli, a 57-year-old finance operations lifer who didn't care about the latest Slack emojis or quarterly vision boards. He cared about one thing only, what worked. I sat there across from them both, watching Damien's smug little smirk spread across his face like a contagious rash. I desperately wish I had stood up and defended Eli right then, but I didn't. I froze. In that moment, I wasn't sure who actually owned the room anymore, the old guard who built the system, or the new money that wanted to tear it all down. The energy in the office had shifted. It was palpable. This was more than just a debate about paper versus digital. It was a battle for the soul of the company, and Damien was starting to swing the axe. Looking back, that first meeting was the beginning of the end, a quiet, almost comical confrontation that would eventually lead to a corporate catastrophe that no one, especially not Damien, saw coming. We were about to learn the hard way that some systems are invisible because they are too essential to see. You have to understand, Eli wasn't just some disgruntled pencil pusher clinging to paper because he feared technology. His checklist, that thick, unglamorous stack of papers, wasn't some quaint personal filing system. It was the entire, functional system of the company's financial operations. No one had ever needed to formally digitize it because Eli himself was the continuity. His notes, scrawled in a shorthand only he truly mastered, tracked every single contract cycle, analyzed vendor behavior for hidden risks, monitored attestation windows, and flagged every bureaucratic landmine that everyone else in the company considered nothing more than useless noise. He was the one who kept the legal department from being dragged into court more times than I could possibly count. In fact, half of our longest-standing vendors only renew their contracts year after year because Eli took the time to send them handwritten thank you notes and remember their actual birthdays. That's the kind of guy he was, a human firewall built on deep expertise and personal relationships. Damien, however, only saw 2 things, inefficiency and redundancy. He started asking those annoying, slick-sounding questions like, why can't this process be completely automated? And do we truly need a secondary validation cycle for payouts if the legal team has already signed off? On the surface, his questions sounded incredibly reasonable, especially if you had never actually worked inside a financial system where one single missing document could completely stall the entire payroll or void a key enterprise contract. Within just 3 weeks, Damien was on a mission to aggressively streamline everything. He proudly brought in this expensive, shiny third-party tool, a supposed financial compliance platform that promised things like integrated batch processing, AI-driven vendor management, and a whole lot of empty corporate jargon. It looked fantastic in the demo, all sleek charts and green dashboards. But that tool had no institutional knowledge. It didn't know which vendors needed quarterly legal renewals specific to California state law. It completely missed that one key vendor's contract had an attestation clause that specifically required a physical, wet signature. It didn't care that one of our most critical suppliers only processed invoices through a specific, archaic Net45 flow that Eli had been manually adjusting and managing since 2014. No one wanted to listen to Eli, though. Damien had the flaw now. The CEO, completely enamored, loved Damien. He called him fresh blood and repeatedly used buzzwords like, "Let's be agile," and "It's time to upgrade the legacy." He said that last line while looking directly at Eli, a dismissive sneer on his face. The absolute worst part of the whole debacle was that Eli didn't fight back. He just quietly nodded, meticulously packed up his manila folder, and started physically shrinking into the background, like he knew this whole scene was inevitable, like he had watched this exact corporate movie play out countless times before. The only thing he offered was a final, chilling piece of advice. Be careful what you delete before you truly understand what it does. Most of us just foolishly shrugged it off. I didn't, but I should have spoken up louder. I didn't. And when Damien scheduled the official all-hands meeting to announce the changes, I had a heavy, sickening knot in my gut even before I opened the calendar invite. The tension in the building was thick enough to cut with a knife. The tension on the day of the all-hands meeting was oppressive. You could practically hear the whispers about Eli's fate in the hallways. Damien strutted to the microphone, flanked by his blindingly shiny PowerPoint presentation and an overly confident grin that showed 2 rows of unnervingly white teeth. He started his classic monologue about legacy inefficiencies and non-essential redundancies, building up to his dramatic climax. Then, he finally delivered the fatal blow, with an air of practiced cruelty. Some processes just belong in a museum, he paused, scanning the room for effect, and some people, too. A few of the interns in the back, trying to score points with the new management, actually laughed. Eli didn't show up to the meeting. By then, his desk was already completely cleared out. The only thing left was his infamous manila folder, placed neatly in the center of the empty desk, and a small, folded note on top of it. The note simply read, "Everything you need is here, if you know how to read it." Damien later spotted the checklist, zeroing in on it like it had personally insulted his mother. We were all crammed into the operations room, heads down in the Q3 vendor reporting, when he stopped, pointed at the folder, like it was radioactive, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Wait, this is your system." The room fell utterly silent. Even the old, loud office printer seemed to stop running, as if it knew disaster was unfolding. Eli, of course, was gone, but the ghost of his procedure remained. The narrative was set, and Damien was ready to take center stage and finish the job. He paced dramatically, playing the role of the visionary. "Let's talk about legacy processes," he said, using that condescending little pause that demanded we all brace for impact. "Handwritten notes, outdated checklists, manual validations in a digital age. You know what that gets us? Errors, delays, vendor confusion. What we need is complete modernization." No one dared to say a word. The younger analysts just shifted uncomfortably, trying their best not to smirk. We all knew where this grand speech was headed. Damien clicked his remote and pulled up a slide labeled Operational Bottlenecks. Dead center was a photo, an actual, high-resolution photo, of Eli's checklist, blown up and backlit like Exhibit A in a federal trial. "This," Damien announced, tapping the screen like a smug TEDx wannabe, "has been our system for over a decade. One man's handwriting. No backups. No workflows. Just intuition. That is not scale. That is a liability." He then turned, facing the wall where Eli's desk used to be, and dropped the hammer without even using Eli's name. "I don't need your checklist. Clear your desk." You could have heard a pin, or, more accurately, a paperclip, drop. Then, an intern in the front row, God bless his naive heart, actually laughed. A nervous, slicing sound. Eli didn't offer a defense. He didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded once, turned on his heel, and walked out of the building. But before he left, he walked up to the table, placed the folded piece of paper, his final note, next to the now infamous checklist, and left them both sitting there. He didn't shred them. He didn't try to hide them. He left them sitting in the open, like a brilliantly set trap. I waited until the room had completely cleared out before I walked over to inspect them. The note was simple and defiant. Use it or don't. The checklist looked exactly the same as always, except for one tiny change. Eli had drawn a small, perfect box in the bottom corner. It was unchecked, empty, with nothing written beside it. But I swear to you, that empty, waiting square felt like it was actively watching the entire room. Damien carried on like he had just successfully slayed a financial dragon. He spent the next few days in a whirlwind, updating the board, talking to legal, and proudly moving Eli's name off the official vendor management chain. But those of us who had actually seen Eli work, the ones who watched him navigate late nights, vendor nightmares, and contract loopholes that no fancy tool could ever hope to catch, we didn't join in the celebrations. We just watched that small, empty checkbox. And somewhere deep in my gut, I felt a nervous, ticking countdown start to echo. The first sign that things were going south was small, barely a blip on the radar. One of our mid-tier vendors, a reliable partner we'd used for years, flagged a non-compliant remittance protocol and paused the fulfillment of a large order. Damien just brushed it off like it was nothing more than a minor annoyance. "They'll get over it," he muttered dismissively, barely even glancing up from his new Surface tablet. But by the time lunchtime rolled around, a second critical vendor chimed in with the exact same complaint. Then, a third. And then, something much uglier happened. Finance urgently pinged operations with a red alert Slack message. Our Tier 1 supplier, the company that hosted our entire infrastructure, had just halted all access to their platform. The reason? A serious contract clause breach. That's when the metaphorical sweating in the room turned into raw life, cold panic. The email landed in everyone's inbox simultaneously, hitting our systems like a heavy brick. Access temporarily restricted, pending fulfillment of compliance condition 5B. Attached to the email was a highlighted, red-lined clause pointing directly to a specific manual attestation requirement. This was a requirement that had to be physically initialed by the designated finance operations officer, a signature line that now sat completely blank. The designated officer, of course, used to be Eli. Suddenly, the same room that had snickered at his retirement age checklist instantly turned into a chaotic war room, filled with panicked Slack threads, urgent need this now subject lines, and the low hum of sheer terror. And that fancy, expensive third-party batch tool that Damien was so incredibly proud of? It didn't even have a function for handling clause exceptions. It was designed only to dump invoices into an automated approval queue and then blindly pray that the vendor's back-end system could sort out the complex details. It could not. By 5 o'clock that evening, our entire development team was forced to work off local backups because the vendor's access keys, the digital lifeline of our company, had been completely revoked. Contracts were stalled. All processing was halted. Half the engineering team was just pacing the hallways, fueled by caffeine jitters, their AirPods silent. And Damien was beyond furious. He was storming around the office, snapping at everyone from the IT department to the janitorial staff, acting as though the office vending machines had personally betrayed him. The crisis was growing exponentially, and the realization was slowly sinking in that the automated system was not the problem. The problem was the lack of the original safeguard, the human element that had been ruthlessly deleted. The true scale of the crisis hit home the very next morning when payroll flagged a massive error. Validation error, TID account confirmation mismatch for 6 employees. Payment withheld pending secondary sign-off. This was another one of Eli's invisible tricks, a dual-layer verification for multi-account payments. He had put this crucial safeguard in place 7 years ago, right after a costly double payout incident. No one else even knew how it truly worked because it wasn't coded into the software. It was embedded in the process, his process. But now, it wasn't just a process that was missing. It was Eli's absence itself. It was the eerie silence in the break room where he used to sit and quietly update his checklist while sipping that sludge he called coffee. It was a gaping hole in the 2 p.m. QA loop, where he used to reliably catch the contracts team forgetting to properly confirm renewal clauses. It was the deep, unsettling stillness around vendor operations, like someone had shut off gravity and forgotten to switch it back on. Eli was the anchor, and now the ship was adrift in a storm. Damien desperately called a floor meeting, but all he could offer were hollow excuses, blaming integration gaps and unexpected dependencies. He even tried to desperately rope in the data team, demanding real-time dashboards to monitor the escalating fallout, but legal wasn't buying any of his spin anymore. They started digging. Quietly, professionally, but with a growing, frantic edge. I saw two of the senior legal associates locked in a glass-walled conference room, holding Eli's old checklist, squinting intently at the abbreviations like they were desperately trying to decode ancient scripture. One of them tapped her pen on a column labeled RB7D Hold.